And I said, yeah, we're related, like 200 years ago, but we're related. And she said, oh, great, because I looked up old orchard restoration and your name popped up. And see, we are on Greenmanville Avenue. And it turns out that this is your ancient family orchard that we would like for you. We just got a grant. We've set it all up. We'd love for you to renovate it. So come on up, take a look, and see if it's something you're interested in.
Hey, apples, make them pop. Pop, 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 pop.
Hey, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Bringing us into this here episode number 349 is Eliza Greenman, who was speaking at Maine Apple Camp from this previous summer. Big tip of the glass to the Maine Organic Farmers Association, that's MAFA. I'll have links in the show notes to that. This is a biannual event, so it's every other year. And it just happened in August, and it was phenomenal. Eliza was giving the keynote address on orchard restoration. So she gave you a little bit of piece there where it started, all in Mystic, Connecticut. She's based down in Virginia, was brought up to restore this orchard that was connected to her ancestors, like distantly connected, but connected nonetheless. And that set her on this journey, both restoring the orchard, good tips there, and also on pear breeding, and it's going to just knock your freaking socks off. I know here at Cider Chat Central, we are super stoked.
Indeed we are, Rhea. Finally, it's all about pears.
Not only that, Perry Pear, but we're kicking off the final episode of Season 7 before we hit number 350. That's our celebratory episode coming up on pears, and I kind of knew that you were going to be very excited to hear that.
He's wearing his tuxedo.
I see that, Mr. Quince, and frankly, Perry Pear looks good in a tuxedo any day of the week.
Thank you very much, Rhea. Indeed I do, because
I know you are Perry Pear.
right.
Should we move on?
Yes, Mr. Quince, let's move on because we got a lot going on in this episode, and we have some sponsors to talk about. Namely, the first one is the American Cider Association, which is putting on, once again, coming up in February, CiderCon, and it's taking place in Chicago. The main part of this conference takes place February 1st through the 3rd, but on January 31st, is Cider Tours taking place in Chicago, all put on by the ACA, and they got some doozy tours to go. And do know, these cider tours for CiderCon always sell out. So folks are kind of like sitting on the fence wondering, should I go, shouldn't I go, should I sign up? And it's like, yes, you should sign up now. And not only that, sign up for the cider tours and get your hotel room, because you don't want to be coming across the other side of town to get to a workshop. But that's another story. It's your money, your time, but I already have my hotel room. I'm already signed up for tours, and I already have my airline ticket, because the later you wait, the more expensive it will get. And just, you're going to be okay. You're really going to be okay. Anyways, we're going to head over with Ambrosia Borowski, who has a number of different roles. Ambrosia is the founder of Chicago Cider Week, which is going to be taking place that whole week, and also the beverage director at the Northman Beer and Cider Garden and a new pub called The Green Post. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that Ambrosia is part of, and I just love the opportunity every time I get to speak with my good friend here. So we're going to go over to this conversation now, and in this piece, we're going to be talking about a tour called the Historical Taverns in Chicago. I mean, boom, think about that, Chicago. When I think about bars in the U.S., I go right to Chicago. I mean, the historical aspect is going to be so cool and so informative. It doesn't matter if they're cider bars or not. If you are in the industry, you want to get a look behind the scenes, because that will inform you from the past. History repeats itself, but also there might be some parts that you don't want to repeat and some you really want to embrace. So what an education. let's move on with the last tour, unless they're going to be adding another one, but I doubt it because it's so busy. And that one's going to be a historical tavern tour. Oh, this is right up my alley too. I mean, I'm actually going to the tour in the morning and this tour in the like late afternoon, evening. I love the tavern. I also love the idea how Chicago is one of those marker points for the rest of the country in terms of taverns and alcohol and the rich history there that really fans out, not just in Illinois, but like nationally.
Right. I mean, everybody knows about Capone, but there's so much more. I mean, Chicago is the center of the country, really, and it is the easiest to get to, which is why I love it when it's a con year, because everything is more affordable for everyone to get to one central location, and it's kind of the heart of the country. We might be a second city, but we've got big hearts. I think we have to have such big hearts because it gets so cold here.
Well, we're not fearful of the cold at all because we're going to be talking to Liz Garibay, who is a renowned pub historian. Liz specializes in the history and culture of alcohol. And what's super cool, Liz is the founder of the Chicago Brewseum. So we have a tour guide who has set up a friggin' museum. We're going to be going to 3 to 4 different taverns. There's going to be some light fare, which is nice. And then at each one, there's going to be a specialty drink at each bar. Woo. So check that out. That's from 2 to 6 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. The last tour is like if you stayed up really late on Monday evening because you flew in like I did on the 30th and you're hanging out with folks, enjoying some cider, you could go to this tour that starts at 2 p.m., 2 to 6 p.m. Let's take a little moment, too, to talk about the Chicago Cider Week and what we might be looking at for that. That's like during the week of CiderCon. Is that right?
Yes, there will definitely be karaoke. There's always karaoke. There's usually a trophy. I believe the folks at STEM won one year.
Ooh.
We're also working on an Escantador competition.
Oh, say more.
So it'll be a 2 parts. There'll be one part to get all of the semifinalists, and then the finalists will be on stage at the very end to kick off the finale, and the winner will have many opportunities to get. I'm being very vague about this.
Well, explain what this is for people who don't understand, aren't in the loop.
So it's pouring Spanish cider. Mm-hmm. In a Chicago Cider Week previous past, we had the folks from Trabanco, which is a wonderful Spanish cider company, come out and actually judge a group of 15 people pouring Spanish cider. And the way Spanish cider is poured is the bottle goes over your head and the glass goes at your waist, and you pour into a straight line, a small amount into a tiny spot. It's a hard skill to have, but watching professionals pour is absolutely amazing. And there's a whole critique because they actually have these competitions in Spain. And so they taught us the rubric, and we're going to be incorporating that into this year's Cider Week, which I'm really pumped about. And working with Ellen Shapiro at the Chicago Cider Summit, which will be wrapping up Cider Week on that Saturday.
Yeah, and that's held at the Navy Pier on February 4th, because CiderCon officially starts on the 1st. The tours are on January 30th. Then CiderCon kicks off on February 1st, goes through the 3rd, and then at the Navy Pier, right basically across the street from where CiderCon is taking place, is where Cider Summit will be taking place, along with events all week as part of Chicago Cider Week. Ambrosia, yes. I want to thank you so much. Of course, your nickname is Broy, which most of us who know and love you, you're doing an amazing job there. You're the reason to go to Chicago and everything you do at the Northman, and certainly for Chicago Cider Week and your good cheer. You make it a destination, and we really thank you for sharing all this with us this week.
Well, thank you. But I do have to say that cider has to take that credit, because we have so many great cideries, cider friends. It's not just me. It takes a village, and I'm happy to be an ambassador, but we all have the apple to smile for.
True that. And the dates, once again, for Chicago Cider Week, it kicks off on the 28th. The American Cider Association CiderCon 2023 is going to start really officially on the 1st, but you want to arrive early. I can't stress this enough, because what's not to love about taking a cider tour on January 31st? That's Tuesday. So arrive on Monday, take the tour on Tuesday, and then be there for Wednesday, February 1st, because, well, one thing, the afternoon cider share is the bomb. It's so much fun. But there's workshops in the morning, and then Thursday and Friday, February 1st through the 3rd are just some amazing workshops. And I'll be talking about a workshop that I'm actually part of on that whole week of amazing events. But I am just one of many, many people that are at CiderCon. So stay tuned. We'll be talking about that in subsequent episodes. In the meanwhile, to find out all this information and more, go to CiderAssociation.org. Once again, that's CiderAssociation.org, or just Google CiderCon 2023. Also, coming up in February of 2023, on the 19th, is the New York International Cider Competition. So it's never too early to start thinking about packaging your cider to head out to this competition. So what I did here was I asked Adam Levy, who is also known as the alcohol professor, the founder of the New York International Cider Competition, how long this particular competition, because do know he has a number of competitions that he runs throughout the world, one for spirits, one for beer and wine. But in this case, I'm asking him specifically, how long has the cider competition been taking place?
We're excited to say this is our 5th year running the New York International Cider Competition. We've been judging cider for 12 years, because we started the New York International Beer Competition 12 years ago. And again, we split off the competition to create the New York International Cider Competition. So we've been judging ciders for 12 years, and officially the New York International Cider Competition is our 5th year.
Now, I know that early is always best to send in the cider, but what's the absolute cutoff date for the New York International Cider Competition to send in entries?
Get them in by February 17th, the latest. The best thing to do is get them to the system. So when they do arrive, we just tag them and panel them so they're ready to go. But the 17th is the deadline. The 19th is the competition. Sooner is always better for us.
And what is the website that they send it to?
You can find more information about the cider competition at nyicidercompetition.com. Again, it's www.nyi, Nancy Yellow India, cidercompetition.com.
Oh my goodness, you got to love that. Nancy Yellow India, cidercompetition.com. That's NYI cidercompetition.com, from the dude who runs international cider competitions worldwide for so many different beverages. But in this case, baby, it's all in New York. So get it in before February 17th. And remember to add promo code CHAT23 for $10 off your entry, and get the form at nyicidercompetition.com.
Walking through the orchards.
Up next, we're going to be going to our featured presentation with Eliza Greenman, all on restoring an orchard and pear breeding. And that sounds kind of clinical. I want to tell you, this is not a clinical conversation because, one, she's very well spoken and she's done her research, and she will take you on a journey that you do not expect to take, particularly for a pear variety called Pyrus Callery. And that's not spelled like calories that you eat. It's actually spelled Calllery. And it's a particular variety that's gotten a bum deal really in the U.S. You see lots of things like, cut down this tree, it's not good, it's invasive, it's a pain in the butt. But that's not true at all. And you're hearing it from somebody who has really fallen for pears. And here at Cider Chat Central, we freaking love our pears.
We do.
Yes, we do, Medlars, because we have Callery Pear.
Yes, I'm here and I'm waiting for this presentation, Rhea.
I know Callery Pear. You need a little patience. Just hang on to your top hat.
Indeed I will.
And I should say, Mr. Quinn's, Callery Pear, and the Medlars, they're known as the Talking Palms. They're my sidekicks here at Cider Chat Central.
Hello.
Yeah, and that's the Medlars. I mean, look, when you're in the cider house and you're with Talking Palms, it's a busy time.
Moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Quince. our in-house taskmaster. Anyways, I don't want to get off task. This is an amazing presentation. You're going to find links to anything that Eliza's talking about, also the Maine Apple Camp, and also the sponsors of this here podcast. If you go to ciderchat.com, you look up episode 349. And yes, there's a reason why I put Eliza as episode 349, because we are one episode away after this week's episode from the 350th episode of Cider Chat. We will be saying goodbye to season 7 and hello to season 8. And I thought, why not bring it in with this just powerhouse person who speaks about a favorite topic of ours? And I think you too will fall for it big time, no doubt. So that's a little piece of it. At the end, I have another announcement about the next episode, 350. So stick around for that. But in the meanwhile, I'll grab a glass and join this chat with Eliza Greenman, now here speaking at the Maine Apple Camp, which took place in August of 2022.
I'm Eliza Greenman. I live in Northern Virginia, so I'm between Loudoun County, Virginia, which is the northernmost county, and then Fauquier, which is the next county down. Both are considered in the DC metro area, and it's a really cool area to me anyway, because it's where I live is traditionally a Quaker community. And if any of you don't know, Quakers are really important in American history in terms of being the first botanists that were in the United States, the first just tree curious people that really set the stage for horticulture. And it so happens that who lives next door to me, or who used to live next door to me, is a guy named J. Russell Smith, who wrote a book called Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture. And so I'm forever chasing his legacy literally on the landscape, and trying to bring back some cultivars he was using, some stuff he brought back from China, some stuff he brought back from all of his travels around the world are right in my neighborhood. And so that's really where I'm seated. And so I have this cool, just very diverse landscape that I'm already working with. And something else about, I got to say something about fruit exploring, in that when I first started, it was in 2008, was when I caught the bug. And, a lot of people Maine was kind of one of the last remnant places that I knew of anyway, that you could go apple exploring. And my awareness was completely limited to apples at the time. And I ended up working with John Bunker and then with a bunch of other people thereafter. But one of the things I've come to learn over the years is that there's two real main conservators of fruit trees and nut trees in the United States. The first is a farm that has livestock. The second is basically somebody like the Quakers who have religious hesitations on developing their land. Otherwise, what I've found is it's becoming increasingly hard to go out and find stuff unless you're looking in more rural areas, or basically where the livestock were. And so today I want to talk to you about two things. The first is the restoration of an orchard that I've just finished in Connecticut. And the second is sort of my pear exploits. So in 2018, I had a rough 2017. And so 2018 was the year of new beginnings. And what happened in 2018? It rained so much in Virginia that everything rotted. It rains over 3 feet above average in Virginia that year. And it rained so much that it caused permanent fungal inoculations in the surrounding areas. So for instance, June berries, once I could harvest them, I had a whole spot, all sorts of areas I could harvest June berries. No more. They're all gone. They do not fruit anymore without crazy cedar apple rust. And so that was a factor of 2018. It sort of changed it all. And it makes me think about like going back and thinking about in Maine, you know, there was that, what year was that freeze that caused all the cultivars to die off? 33, 34, yeah. So to me, like 2018 was akin to one of those events where, like, as the American chestnut people say, and I actually hate this, it was an event that caused, what is that called? Functional extinction of some crops. And so that's where I'm working with here. I live in Zone 7A. I am, as Michael Phillips used to say, I am in the final frontier of fruit growing, where it's a soup, like it's hot, it's humid, and like I have, you know, a good indicator for that is if you have tree frogs on your windows at night for 3 months out of the year, you know that it's going to be hard to grow fruit and nut trees. And so that's where I am. And I moved from Maine, like really feeling like I was in Maine for 8 years, I think, 7 years. And I just decided I had to go back. I had to go back to Virginia. Like, I loved it there. I really struggled with the cold. And so it took me years to sort of find my niche. I had gone to Kyrgyzstan. Like, I was hell-bent on not spraying, and I still am. Like, or maybe not spraying, but like not spraying toxins or poisons or anything that would kill the ecosystem around me is something that like I had to draw a line with. And so in moving back to Virginia, it was like every time I would say something like this, I get eye rolls. Virginia Tech Community Cooperative Extension, eye rolls. Any grower in the state of Virginia, eye rolls. Cider makers, eye rolls, because this was like 2010 to 2015 or so. So it was rough. And so I had gone to Kyrgyzstan. I was like on a hunt for like the genetic homeland of apples where like the most like genetic, if a disease had hit, it had hit several times in the millions of years that these things were native to it. So I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to go. And I brought all that back, and what I really came away with was, you know what's really cool about the Kyrgyzstani and Kazakhstani orchards is that they have livestock in them. And actually, like, probably a lot of their pest and disease issues are allayed with the use of livestock. And so when I came back to the United States, I was like, I got to get livestock in my orchards. And in my orchards means trees I've planted on other people's properties and lost over the last several years, let's say a decade, because I didn't realize what like bomb-proof leases were and the fact that they don't exist. And I could speak reams on land tenure and being a perennial grower and trying to grow fruits. And I think that's partially what is so conducive to like fruit exploring is because you don't actually have to have land in order to have access to fruit. So all the genetics I brought back from Kyrgyzstan, I don't really have access to, so I've kind of started over. All right, now let's go to this orchard in Connecticut. So it was 2018. I was starting over. That season had been the worst growing season I'd ever experienced, and I told Michael Phillips. I exclaimed to him, "Oh my God, am I going to have to start growing pears?" And since he had held me to that ever since I said that and said, "Well, Eliza, you know, you'd be one of the few doing it, so let's, you know, go for it. If you don't think apples are going to cut it in your climate of heat and humidity and constant disease, try pears." And at the time, I had just leased this property, which I still hold the lease on. It's good. And they had two very, very old pears. And I was looking at them and just like in this just awful turmoil of disease and pest and rot and everything, these pears were perfectly fine. No problems with the leaves, no problems with the fruits, like no problems whatsoever. They were perfectly fine. So that stuck in my head. Later on that year, let's say a few months later, I got this phone call from a woman in Connecticut. And she said, Eliza Greenman, are you related to the Greenmans of Mystic, Connecticut? I was like, I have no idea. So I looked it up. I called a couple cousins. And sure enough, I am. I mean, they're pretty distant cousins, but I am. So I called her back and I said, yeah, we're related, like 200 years ago, but we're related. And she said, oh, great, because I looked up old orchard restoration and your name popped up. And see, we are on Greenmanville Avenue. And it turns out that this is your ancient family orchard that we would like for you. We just got a grant. We've set it all up. We'd love for you to renovate it. So come on up, take a look, and see if it's something you're interested in. And at that time, I think I had just gotten fired from like a terrible job. And so I was like, sure, I got nothing but time, let's do it. And so I went up, and it was hard to see any of the trees. There was so much autumn olive and just general invasives that you could see some tops of some trees, but really, it was 10 feet of just solid autumn olive thicket that I couldn't walk through. And so they were like, are you interested in restoring this? And so I then asked how much money they had, and that seemed to be not a problem. And so I said, sure, let's do it. What the heck? And so that spring, early, or let's say winter, I brought a guy up from North Carolina who had a lot of interest or a lot of expertise in using a forestry mulcher. And this is a lesson I learned in life. This is a big one, is that if you have a lot of area that you need to clear that has thorns, most of the plant material has thorns, you need to call somebody with a forestry mulcher, because he did in 2 days what would take weeks, if not months, to try and cut and chip. And so what a forestry mulcher is, it's a drum, and it literally chips a whole tree down to nothing. And so I had him, he was really good, and I had him cutting and mulching everything that wasn't a pear or an apple, and it was all autumn olive, all of it. And so he did that. And I literally cried when I saw this, because I've spent a lot of time feeding a mulcher and all of this stuff. And it took him 2 days. 2 days and $1,700 to do 4 acres of completely covered orchard. So this is number one lesson learned. Pay it. Do it. Because you'll never get that time back, and you'll probably get wounded mortally, So this is the first thing, is that I cried over the happiness of this orchard being mulched. And so then the next step was I had to rent a lift, because these trees had so much invasive vines in them, or not even just invasive, native vines as well. Grape, of the natives, greenbrier was a big one, grape was a big one, and then outside of that it was bittersweet, and it was everything. Just everything. And so we couldn't tell if the trees actually had a canopy or not. They were just completely loaded. So I rented a lift. It was $2,400 for the month, and I went to town. And one of the best tools I used was a battery-powered pruner. Give up on the hand pruners if you have to make, 500,000 cuts. I'm old enough to say now that it really does matter. Carpal tunnel matters, and it's a problem pervasive in this realm, because you have to use these muscles in grafting, pruning, all of that. It was they were $150, and they paid for themselves over. So in this lift, I just cut every single vine, and I literally just dropped thousands of pounds of vines out of these trees and onto the floor. And once I did that, I stood back and I was like, you know what? And I did this for 100 trees or so. Because when he had originally, when the nature center had gone through and GPSed all these points, there were 37 trees. But after he had gone through and chipped everything in between, we had over 200. And so after 100 or so, And this took me, it was just a slog. And I had somebody walk up to me in a bakery and leave me a note asking if I was being domestically abused, which I had to then approach him and say, I really appreciate this, you asking, and you're doing the right thing, but it's thorns and vines. Like, I'm just so beat up. So, like, there's no romanticizing this. It was a slog, and it hurt. So once all of it was done, or not, well, mostly done for that year, stood back and realized, hot damn, these are pears. Every single, like 97% of these are pears. So what's going on? When I got, and I had to tell them, like, hey, I'm sorry, your grant is paying for like apple restoration, but actually it's pears. This could be really cool, not sure, but like, let's keep up the momentum and, bring me back this summer and fall to evaluate, and we'll go from there. So then I got home, back to Virginia, which was like, 3 weeks ahead. And the Callery Pear, so Bradford Pear, it is Pyrus calleryana. It's just one cultivar, but everything pretty much gets lumped into Bradford Pear from that species. And that was in bloom. And when I got back to the farm, the two trees that were really old, the pear trees that had done fine in 2018, were also in bloom at the same time. And I was thinking, you know what, wouldn't it be crazy if those two were hybridizing? Like, that would just be so, I wonder what would happen if that was the case. And so then, I think that sometimes the landscape just starts to, you just reach this point where you can't turn back. It was like, okay, so ancient or long lost family orchard that somebody just found money for me to prune turns out to be pears. 2018, the only crop I had was pears. Come back home, what's blooming? More and more pears. And so I just took it seriously and was like, you know what? I'm going to dive in. I'm going on this rabbit hole, and we're going to talk pears. I'm going to do pears. So with those two that were blooming at the same time, I hand-pollinated a bunch. Let's say, I hand-pollinated like 50 flowers, bagged them, and then in the following fall, harvested them, took the seeds out, planted them. And so we'll pick that up in a second. But also what happened was I became obsessed with pears. And so everything I saw in the landscape became pears. And I also started to learn as much as I could about Callery pear, Pyrus calleryana, because here it is, like this tree that's growing everywhere. It's seen as a mega invasive. And so I started to think about, like, you know what? I kind of want to just grow things that just show up. And for me, that's persimmon, and then that's a couple nut trees and some other things. But also, if I wanted to grow like a palm fruit, that's gonna be pear, because it turns out that Callery pear is probably the best possible rootstock there is for the South, for the Mid-South, probably for the Mid-Atlantic and beyond. It has some cold hardiness issues, but driving up, it has no problem with southern Maine, that's for sure, because driving up I saw a whole bunch. I saw a bunch in Massachusetts and a whole bunch in Connecticut. And so I did this deep dive, and there was this guy named Frank Meyer of the Meyer lemon. He also, that was pretty much one of his claims to fame. He was sent over to China because in the state of Georgia in the 1800s, they had planted a European pear orchard. Giant, it was like the next destined pear place in the United States. And what happened? Every single one of them died of fire blight. And so then, let's say, a couple decades later, in California, fire blight started to show up, because they moved the whole industry to California, as they do. So fire blight started to show up, and they started to freak out, like, oh my God, we're going to go the way of Georgia. We got to do something. And so what did they do? USDA sent a fruit explorer to China to find fire blight resistant trees in the landscape. Frank Meyer, who is probably the toughest guy to ever live, walked like 50 miles a day through China and brought back seed lots from all over the place. And he wrote, I have this quote here of him with Pyrus calleryana, which is, Pyrus calleryana is simply a marvel. One finds it growing under all sorts of conditions. One time, dry, sterile mountain slopes, then again with its roots in standing water at the edge of a pond. Sometimes in the open pine forest, then again, scrub on blue stone ledges in the burning sun. Sometimes in low bamboo jungle in the company of Chinese pistachio. And then again along the course of a fast-flowing mountain stream on the occasionally burned-over slope of a pebbly hill. This tree is nowhere found in groves, always as scattered specimens, but very few large trees were ever seen due to the locals harvesting it for lumber because the wood is really great quality. And so I read that, and then I saw the tests that were brought over. So once the seed came from China, another Frank Reimer, on the West Coast, started doing all sorts of fire blight tests and found that, and this is something I really want to push, is they found that Pyrus calleryana was fire blight tolerant, extremely. And I think that tolerant is a word that needs to be used more often in describing apple and pear cultivars, because there is an amount of strike that it permits and then seals off. Everything gets fire blight, but it's a matter of how much and if it can cordon it off, and then it's not a problem. And so Pyrus calleryana was showing that it was cordoning it off after an inch, 2 inches, no problem. Sections it off, not an issue. And that's something I really want to start getting people to think about. The idea of resistance isn't really true. Maybe it's me being semantic here, but I love the idea of finding things and watching them and seeing if those strikes progress over the years. I don't cut anything out. I stopped cutting everything out because I came along with this idea, and so far, in the stuff that seems to arrest the fire blight strike, it doesn't go any further. There's other trees that'll die back all the way to the ground, and so those obviously don't make it. So anyway, Pyrus calleryana, great for fire blight. Turns out it's also great for every fungal disease there is. It's been through it all. It's basically in the genetic sphere, homeland of pears. So what happened? Why didn't this become the next big rootstock? And the answer is, it doesn't stool well. And that's the only reason why Pyrus calleryana wasn't thoroughly adopted into the pear industry around the turn of in the early 1900s. So now, fast forward, the other thing is Frank Meyer walked so far and collected so many populations that were distinct populations, genetically distinct, that when he brought them back over to the United States, though they were pollen sterile with each other, the fact that they were meeting up with all these distant cousins that were from everywhere in China, because Frank Meyer was so amazing at walking, that they started to produce fruit. And so that's how we ended up with the invasive Pyrus calleryana Bradford Pear, is because we started just planting all the seeds from all the lots, and they started to pollinize one another. So today, where I'm at in the South, is that the Callery pear is the most maligned tree probably in existence in the South, in existence in the Midwest, whatever. It's invasive. The reason why it's invasive is because the fruit is the size that allows our native frugivorous birds to eat it. How do you get rid of that? You get the fruit larger. And so that's what revisiting those seeds that I planted off of the hybrid Callery on the fence line meets the old heirloom European pear that was on the farm was, what's the chance that in the F1 stage of this cross, I'm gonna get larger fruit to make these pears less invasive. Turns out, as of this year, 3 years in its third leaf, I have fruit on a lot of these seeds because, turns out, Callery Pear is extremely precocious, either as a rootstock or from seed with its genetics. Also very vigorous. And every single one of the pears off of those 50 pollinated flowers that I bagged is larger than the gape width, which is the beak width, which means it can swallow, of the frugivorous birds in my region. Now, if like a parrot comes through, that's a different scenario, but that would come from DC, and that doesn't happen very often. And so I spent the summer just like seeing pears everywhere. And this was in summer of 2019. And I found I'm from coastal Virginia, zone 8A, even hotter than where I live currently in zone 7A. And I was just driving around, and all of a sudden I saw the largest pear tree I've ever seen in my life. And if it wasn't on an Indian reservation, I'd probably try to register it through like the largest pear in North America. But they've asked for that not to happen, and that's perfectly fine. And so I took a look, and I was like, you know what? That thing is grafted. What the heck? It's this big, no joke, this big around, hollow, 40 feet tall, and it dropped 32 bushels of pears in one season. And so I started to think about, like, why is that thing there? How does a pear get to coastal Virginia, soup, just humidity soup, Virginia, and it's perfectly fine, no disease, no pests, whatever. And I did a lot of research. I do a lot of archival research where I digitize archives. I have them on a hard drive, and that allows me to scan within seconds, for keywords and things. Highly recommend it. If you get into this, let's share, because there's so many archives that need scanning and digitizing. But I got into the Prince Nursery, which is in Flushing, New York, and found a receipt to Martha Washington's estate, which was also called the White House Plantation. And turns out their distiller, they're basically the guy that made Washington's pear brandy, had ordered these trees from Prince Nursery right hot off the press, had just come over to the United States. It's 1819. It was the son of Washington's distiller, had just ordered it all. And the train to White House Plantation, unfortunately, went over this Indian reservation. And so that's what it is. It's a sand pear. It's the first that was brought over to the United States. So it's Pyrus pyrifolia, but it's the parent of kefir. And so for all of you who might have been growing kefir and like, man, this thing is really awesome, it doesn't get anything, this is the genetics, the base genetics that go into that too. And then I found all sorts of other stuff that I won't go into, but just cool pear stuff. That's still living. The only fruit trees in the South that are still living are pears and mulberries that were intentionally grafted and that are on the landscape. Unfortunately, because we have vines, we have this vine problem, and so the things that with thorns, like all these pear genetics, these wild pear genetics that come up, if they've got thorns, it saves it from livestock. But really, livestock is the main reason why there's these trees left on the landscape. Okay, so then I was back in Connecticut. Summer rolls around, right around this time, and these trees are loaded with pears. And the craziest pears you've ever seen. Not a single one was probably bigger than this. Every single one of them had a crazy russeting to them, except for there were some that were very miniature Anjou kind of pears, but just tiny. But everything else was kind of Callery or sand pear shaped, had the russeting, but you could tell there was European genetics in them. And so I started to look back into this orchard, and sure enough, when it was abandoned, what did they do? They put cattle in there. Cattle were in there for years and years and years and years. And about 20 years ago, they took the cattle off and the invasives grew in. And so that's pretty much like the successional process of where we are with fruit exploring is once the livestock come off, trees are screwed unless people can find funding to go reclaim them from the wild. Because, and here's a little also I learned this year that France pays 50% of cost for this in order to save their heritage genetics that are absolutely being overgrown as we speak. And so if anybody knows any good legislators or want to get this in the farm bill, it would be super sweet to offer some funding for reclaiming old pear orchards, or just reclaiming old orchards from invasives. And so I started, and then I saw, you know what, Mystic's really close to Long Island. Let's start looking for some papers on what trees were brought over from, let's look at the Prince Nursery reports and see if there's any receipts coming over to Mystic. Sure enough, there was the sand pear, but also later the trees were lined with Callery pear. So what I was working with and had uncovered was probably like second generation hybrids of some sort of Asian pear with European pears that were left on the site. Could be third generation as well. Some of them are probably no older than 60 years or so. I got out my refractometer, which, shout out to everybody who has a refractometer in their car. And in 2019, which was a good year, the average Brix was 17 and a half. I have a slide that shows them all. The highest one measured was 24, and the lowest one measured was 14. That alone is higher than most dessert fruit you're going to get your hands on, or period, unless they're like covered in scab, which also I'm a big fan of. And so also when tasting them, it ran the gamut. It was like the best possible day, because I was coming from a cider bent, just due to the feasibility of growing low input, and I was tasting pears that had crazy acidity, and then crazy tannins, and then beautiful bittersweets and bitter sharps, and like it just ran the gamut. No acidity. And it was just in a sample population of like 100 trees. And when I started to talk to pear people, which there's not many of, by the way, John Reynolds was one of them, and he's a great one to talk to about pears. But he was like, the problem with Asian pears is they don't have any acidity. Like they don't have much to them. They're just sort of bags of water and sugar. And I was like, oh, dude, I have the solution to that, and I think it's this hybridizing of Asian pear that's invasive with, or just like old American brought over with our Europeans. And so another year went by, I evaluated again. This was with Hurricane Ida coming through and causing premature drop, and it was a weird year. But still, the Brix was higher on these trees than it was the previous year, and that was last year. And there were also every single one of them not every, I would say 90% of the trees that fruited last year, or in 2020, fruited again in 2021. And that's gotta be a genetic handle on the Bradford pear side of things, because they flower every single year. They flower profusely every single year. And in seeing spring photos of these trees, they're just covered in flowers. And so what I'm getting at here is, it's not a silver bullet for sure, but what I'm really excited about is this future of a truly sustainable palm fruit that can withstand fire blight and fungal infections and drought and huge amounts of rain, because I get it all. I seem to get a lot of rain or a drought. It doesn't matter. just like stress galore. And what's starting to prove itself to me are these hybrid crosses. It seems like, and not every Callery pear is created equal too. Like this is the year, for example, like cedar apple rust is terrible this year where I am, and quince pear rust as well. And some of them get it, but this is the year to find the genetics you want to work with and you want to cross with. Just like apples up here, is if they're looking good, throw them in your program. And what's so exciting too is that I'm able to, I have fruit in the third year. And then also after 1 year with stump sprouts, Eric Schatt shared that he tried to graft like 1 year apple saplings, the wood from that onto existing rootstock to see if he could speed it up. And so and it didn't work because of sort of like mechanical juvenility and whatever. But I decided to try that with Callery pear onto Callery rootstock, and it works. So I have some cultivars that are fruiting on Callery rootstock, which I top work, by the way. Like I do a lot of top working of Callery pear. Just cut it down. I cut it above deer browse, stick a scion in, cover it, and then it fruits in 2 years, sometimes 3. And so with brand new saplings, I have sort of a double repository of them where I'm almost in real time able to tell how it grafts, if it's same to the seedling that it's coming from. The other thing is, when I was in Corsica earlier this year, looking at their chestnut scene, and basically, like, I'll just sum this up, is that Corsicans have like native chestnut forests in the mountain regions, and about 800 years ago, the Genoese brought over certain cultivars of chestnuts and top worked all the chestnuts that were growing natively to cultivars. And what's left now is basically the grafted chestnuts that are being overgrown, and generally, and that kept up through until like World War I, where they just kept grafting the same cultivars on and any seedling that came up. And that really taught me a lesson. One is diversify, because they got hammered by some new diseases, or like new insects. But two is, it really counts to grow something, to try and figure out how to grow something that's just sprouting on your land, like without any provocation. So for me, like, I've been working on ways to, like, I'll set up, for instance, I'm this close to closing on 50 acres, hopefully by the end of this month, maybe next month, but it's there. And I've set out posts, for example, like, and some of my leased land too, I've set out posts just as landing pads for birds. Because what do I want? I want those Callery genetics, especially the ones that might be hybridizing on my fence line, and I can talk about that for a second too, but I want the birds to land, poop, and I want that tree right where I want it to grow with thorns. And so what I have been doing is, I'll put those in generally in the winter, and sure, I'll get some invasives in there too, because like multiflora rose does the same thing. You know, it has the same berries at the same time. I've been doing this with mulberry too, with a lot of success, so I really recommend just putting in posts for birds to land where you want a future tree. But the idea of having a taproot is really amazing, and accessing a taproot. And sort of quitting this whole game of rootstock, which I've been working on for a long time. And so if it takes me pears in order to get off the rootstock game, which I think is wildly understudied in terms of like in a holistic, if you want to talk like a holistic chance, I think that rootstocks are wildly understudied. They're only looking for certain things. So there's that. Also, I've begun top working every pear tree. I've spaced them out, and on my fence line I've got, let's say 1,000. It's a lot. pears that just self-seeded, and I've top worked. It's become a repository for everything that blooms at the same time of Callery Pear. That's loaded in my neighborhood. It's everywhere. It's a street tree. In hopes that they'll pollinize and both lead the charge in creating a lesson in getting out of the invasive category for fruit size, but also who knows what's going to come up. It's a totally fun experiment where I'm sort of setting the stage for more fruit exploring. And my neighbors, and these neighbors at this leased piece of property, it's like a multi-million-dollar DC metro subdivision with an HOA and everything. And they love this. They love the idea. They come and help. And so it's sort of like a little microcosm for what I hope can happen rather than this stupid, I won't get into it. But I think that the current model around Callery Pear, we got it, we better use it because it's not going anywhere. So we might as well fix it. So that's a long rambling how I got into pears. The pears that I have, I brought some that are off my little seedling trees. I also brought some that are off the orchard in Mystic, Connecticut. I think they're the new American Perry pear because God knows the European Perry pears die quick in my climate. And so heed the warning. They don't like it. They don't like anything my climate has to offer. And so if that trend goes any north, you might be screwed. And so I'm really excited about this new frontier that's come about really since 1985 or so, where we're no longer solely concentrating on, back then in 1985 was the last chance of remnant pears on the landscape to cross with brand new fire blight free genetics. And so that's a lot of times gives hope for urban exploring. If you see something that's larger than the size of a pea that's fruiting, you need to go for larger than 10 millimeters in size of fruit. Then, and if it shakes off the tree, harvest it. That's got a hybrid, or at least get curious and test it, taste it. You might ruin your day tasting it, or else it might be delicious. And I guess the last thing I want to say is there's this one tree near to me that also was sort of part of guiding me to pears, because I've sort of left apples, I have to admit. I still have triploids and some other crazy stuff that I do love, but there's this one tree that is a hybrid from something J. Russell Smith planted and something else, but it's obvious to me that it's a hybrid tree. It's growing, it's got its roots directly in a fast-moving stream. It has cattle underneath of it year-round that are just depositing huge amounts of nitrogen, which, by the way, if you're thinking about silvopasture, this is something really to consider because for me, too much nitrogen means fire blight half the time or all the time. And so it's never had a fire blight strike. I've been evaluating it since 2015. It doesn't have any problems. And the pear itself, it has grit cells when it's not ripe, but when it ripens, it's this beautiful, buttery texture that tastes like grapes. So there's just a lot of hope out there for crazy new flavors and things. It's just pears are hard. We got to figure out how to work with them, because I remember when I was at John Bunker's and he talked about Black Oxford, and I was like, how do you know to put it in storage? And he's like, well, that's what they told me to do when when the box came from Oxford, Maine or whatever, and it's okay, well, I'm not working with that. I can't, there's no support here. There's no pass. So you got to figure out, do you press it immediately, even though the seeds are white? Can you eat it? Do you store it? What does that look like? So there's a lot of barriers into getting pears there. But look what's happened over the last 12 years in terms of getting cider apples there too. That's amazing in itself. And so everybody should grow pears, be excited about Callery, top work everything. Thank you.
That was Eliza Greenman speaking at the Maine Apple Camp taking place in August of 2022, and that is hosted by the Maine Organic Farmers Association. You're going to be finding links to that organization and more, all the mentions in this here podcast to our sponsors by going to ciderchat.com, episode 349. Now, one more thing I want to let you all know about this particular talk with Eliza Greenman is that at the tail end, there was a Q&A. It's about 16 minutes long, super informative. That extra audio clip is going to be uploaded to the Cider Chat Patreon page. And if you haven't heard about Patreon yet and what it does for Cider Chat, well, it's a website that helps this podcaster keep on podcasting because folks signed up to be patrons, and that means that you are fiscally or financially, if you will, supporting the podcast. And I'm hoping that if you've listened this far, you are definitely getting some value. So it's a really nice way to, well, shoot, tip this podcaster and say, hey, we want to hear more because this is listener-supported podcasting, my friends. It definitely is. So if you could do that, that'd be great. Go to Cider Chat Patreon, spelled Patreon, or if you can't do that, just hit the donate button at ciderchat.com. Next week, there will be no episode rolling out for Cider Chat. We're saving episode 350 to roll out on January 4th. So that'll be a time where we'll say adios to season 7 and hello to season 8. And, I feel like I'm floating above the earth right now, even at that thought, going into season 8. That means 7 years behind of Cider Chat and 350 episodes. Hooey, what an accomplishment for Cider and certainly this podcaster. So a lot of gratitude to all the folks out there who have been supporting this podcast and sharing it and telling your listeners who come into your tasting rooms, sharing it there and spreading the good cheer, because without your support, well, we wouldn't have a cider podcast like Cider Chat. So thank you. Thank you. I want to wish you all a very happy new year. I can't wait to see and talk to you in 2023 as we continue to celebrate cider going up around the world. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Wind Caller and the Talking Palms. Hello! Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville in 2023.
We like cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Oh yes we do. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There's a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Ba-da-da-dum. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We like orchards, having some fun. Yeehaw!